Asterisk, in a galaxy sculpted by peace and diplomacy, the Valerians called out for help. Their art, their wisdom, their harmony shattered by the brutal Scarix invasion, they reached across the stars, praying for protectors. What arrived were not diplomats, not guardians, but monsters that battle-hardened, cold-eyed, forged in centuries of endless war. The Terran Strike Team didn't speak of peace, they spoke in tactics, in demolitions, in fire, and as the Valerians watched in awe and horror, they began to understand they hadn't summoned saviors, they'd awakened something far worse for their enemies, something that doesn't ask for surrender, something that doesn't stop until the threat is Ash. This is humanity, and when we come, we don't bring mercy, we bring the end. Asterisk, when hope becomes fear, the morning sun cast its golden light across the crystal spires of Valeria Prime, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The city hummed with the gentle energy of a civilization that had known peace for 3 centuries. Artists worked in floating gardens, their creations dancing in the air like living sculptures. Scientists studied the harmony between technology and nature, their discoveries shared freely among the stars. Children played in parks where the grass sang softly when touched, and their laughter echoed through streets made of polished stone that glowed with inner light. Elder Vexhai stood on the observation deck of the council chamber, watching his people begin another day of peaceful existence. His silver hair flowed like liquid metal down his back, and his eyes held the wisdom of someone who had seen his species grow from warlike ancestors into something beautiful. The Valerians had chosen a different path long ago. They had put down their weapons, embraced knowledge, and built a society based on understanding and cooperation. But peace, as Vexhai had learned from studying the history of other species, was often fragile. The first sign of trouble came as a shadow across the sun. Not clouds, but something vast and metallic that blocked the light with its sheer size. The Scarix dreadnought hung in the sky like a tumor, its black hull scarred with the marks of 1,000 battles. It was followed by another, then another, until the sky was filled with the dark shapes of an invasion fleet that Vexhai's hands trembled as he activated the emergency communication system. Across the city, alarms began to sound, but they were gentle tones, designed not to frighten, but to inform. Even in crisis, the Valerians maintained their commitment to harmony. The attack began without warning or demand for surrender. Crimson beams of energy lanced down from the ships, striking the city's defensive shields with devastating force. The barriers that had protected Valeria for generations flickered and died within minutes. The Scarix were not interested in conquest through diplomacy or fear. They wanted the rare quantum crystals that powered Valerian technology, and they would take them by force. General Cross stood on the bridge of his flagship, his reptilian features twisted into what might have been a smile. The Scarix were an old species, shaped by millennia of warfare and conquest. They had scales like black iron, claws that could tear through steel, and eyes that glowed with predatory hunger. To them, the Valerians were nothing more than soft prey, sitting on valuable resources. Begin the harvest, Cross commanded, his voice like grinding stone. Kill any who resist. Capture the rest for the labor camps. The Scarix warriors poured from their ships like a plague of metal and fury. They stood twice as tall as most species, their armor fused with their natural carapaces. In their hands, they carried weapons that had been perfected through countless campaigns across the galaxy. They had conquered 16 systems in the past decade alone, and Valeria would simply be another trophy for their empire. But the Valerians, for all their gentleness, were not helpless. Their defense forces activated ancient protocols, and the city's buildings began to transform. Walls shifted to create barriers, parks became staging areas, and the very architecture of their civilization adapted to protect its people. Energy weapons emerged from hidden positions, and Valerian soldiers took up arms they had hoped never to use. The battle was brief and decisive. The Scarix had brought overwhelming force, and the Valerians, despite their courage, were not warriors by nature. Their weapons were designed to stun and disable, not to kill. Their tactics were based on protection and evacuation, not on the brutal mathematics of combat that the Scarix had mastered. Within 6 hours, the capital was burning. The crystal spires lay shattered, their light forever extinguished. The floating gardens had crashed to the ground, their beauty trampled under the boots of invaders. The children who had played in singing grass were now huddled in shelters, their laughter replaced by terrified whispers. Vex-High found himself in the emergency command center, deep beneath the city. Around him, the remnants of the Valerian Council worked desperately to coordinate evacuations and organize resistance. But they all knew the truth. They were losing, and they were losing badly. The northern districts have fallen, reported Counselor Zeth, her voice hollow with defeat. The Skariks are moving toward the crystal mines. Once they control those, they'll have everything they came for. What about the outer colonies? Asked another council member. Can they send reinforcements? They're under attack, too, Vex-High replied, staring at the tactical display. Red markers showed Skarik's forces advancing on every front. This isn't a raid. It's a full invasion. They mean to take everything. The chamber fell silent except for the distant rumble of explosions above. Each member of the council was thinking the same thing, but none wanted to voice it. They were going to lose their world, their people, their entire civilization. And there was nothing they could do to stop it. There is one possibility, Vex-High said slowly. The emergency protocols include a provision for requesting aid from allied species. But we don't have any military alliances, Zeth protested. Our treaties are all cultural and scientific exchanges. Not alliances, Vex-High corrected. Appeals. Distress calls sent to any species that might be willing to help. The Galactic Council has provisions for humanitarian intervention. It was a desperate plan, but it was the only one they had. The Valerians activated their long-range communication array, sending out a broad-spectrum distress signal to every corner of known space. The message was simple: a peaceful species was under attack and needed help from anyone willing to provide it. Most species ignored the call. The galaxy was vast and conflicts were common. Many civilizations had learned that getting involved in other people's wars was a good way to become victims themselves. But in a quiet sector of space, in a system marked on no tourist maps, the signal was received by a different kind of species entirely. The Terran Defense Corps monitoring station picked up the transmission at 0347 hours, standard time. The duty officer, a tired-looking woman named Sarah Martinez, almost dismissed it as another border dispute. But something in the message made her pause. The desperation in the alien voice, the clinical description of orbital bombardment, the mention of civilian casualties. She forwarded the message up the chain of command, where it eventually reached the desk of Admiral Harrison Webb. Webb was a career military officer who had seen action in 12 different star systems. He had gray hair, tired eyes, and scars that told the story of humanity's expansion into hostile space. Another distress call, his aide reported, species called the Valerians. They're under attack by something called the Skarik's Empire. Webb pulled up the intelligence files on both species. The Valerians were listed as peaceful, advanced, and non-threatening. The Skariks were marked as hostile, expansionist, and dangerous. It was a typical case of predators attacking prey, played out countless times across the galaxy. Recommendation? Webb asked. Officially, we're too far away to provide meaningful assistance. By the time we get there, it'll be over. Unofficially, we've got Strike Team Echo in the area. They're finishing up a training exercise in the Kepler system. Webb nodded slowly. Strike Team Echo was one of humanity's elite units, specialists in rapid deployment and asymmetric warfare. They weren't diplomats or peacekeepers. They were soldiers trained to fight in the worst conditions the galaxy could offer. Send them, Webb ordered, full authority to engage hostile forces. The orders were transmitted to the TSS Retribution, a stealth frigate that had been humanity's answer to the question of how to fight enemies that were bigger, stronger, and more numerous. The ship's commander, Captain Lisa Crane, read the mission brief with interest. Humanitarian intervention, she told her crew. Peaceful aliens under attack. We're to provide assistance. In the ship's briefing room, 5 figures sat around a metal table. They wore the dark gray uniforms of the Terran Defense Corps, but their armor was different, more advanced, more personalized, more deadly. These were the members of Strike Team Echo, and they had been forged in the fires of humanity's brutal expansion into space. Commander Zara Thorn was their leader, a woman with sharp features and eyes that seemed to see everything. She had been born on Mars during the Colony Wars, and her first memories were of air raid sirens and the smell of burning metal. She had learned to fight before she learned to read, and she had been killing humanity's enemies for 20 years. Sergeant Maya Chun was the team's demolitions expert, a small woman with an easy smile and hands that could turn household items into weapons of mass destruction. She had grown up in the asteroid belt, where survival meant knowing how to make explosives from mining equipment at Dr. Finn Reacher was their medic, a tall man with gentle hands and the kind of calm that came from saving lives under fire. He had trained in the worst field hospitals humanity had ever known, and he could perform surgery while enemy shells fell around him. The other two members of the team were Corporal Jake Morrison, a sniper who could put a round through a target's eye from 2 kilometers away, and Private Luis Santos, a communications specialist who could hack enemy systems or call down orbital strikes with equal skill. "What do we know about the enemy?" Thorn asked, studying the tactical display. "Scarix Empire," Chin replied, reading from her tablet. "Reptilian species, aggressive expansionists. They've conquered 16 systems in the past decade. Standard tactics include orbital bombardment followed by ground assault. And the friendlies? Valerians, peaceful species, advanced technology, but minimal military capability. They're asking for help." Thorn nodded slowly. It was a familiar story. In humanity's experience, the galaxy was full of species that had evolved past the need for war, only to find themselves helpless when violence came to them. The humans had taken a different path. They had emerged from a world that had tried to kill them every day, and they had learned to fight back. "Time to target?" Thorn asked. 18 hours at maximum burn, Captain Crane replied over the intercom. "We'll arrive in system just as the sun rises over their capital city." "Copy that," Thorn said. She looked at her team, seeing the same expression on each face. They were ready. They had been born ready. "Echo Team, gear up. We have work to do." On Valeria Prime, Elder Vexhai stood in the ruins of a city, watching the sky for any sign of hope. The Scarix had been systematically destroying everything beautiful his people had built. The crystal spires were gone, the floating gardens were ash, and the singing grass was silent forever. But in the distance, just at the edge of his vision, he saw something that made his ancient heart beat faster. A ship was approaching, small and fast, cutting through the atmosphere like a blade. It wasn't Scarix, and it wasn't Valerian. It was something else entirely. The ship landed in what had once been the Central Park, its hull scarred with the marks of battle. The boarding ramp lowered with a hiss of hydraulics, and 5 figures emerged. They were smaller than Vexhai had expected, barely taller than Valerian children. But there was something about the way they moved, the way they held their weapons, that made him step back instinctively. These were not the diplomats and peacekeepers he had hoped for. These were predators, and they had come to hunt. Commander Thorn stepped forward, her eyes scanning the devastation around them. She had seen conquered worlds before, but something about this one was different. The Valerians had built something beautiful, and the Scarix had destroyed it not out of necessity, but out of cruelty. "You called for help," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the rubble. "We're here." Vexhai approached slowly, his hands raised in the universal gesture of peace. "I am Elder Vexhai of the Valerian Council. We are grateful for your response, but I must ask, what are you?" Thorn's smile was sharp as a blade. "We're human, and we're going to solve your problem." As the words left her mouth, the sound of Scarix aircraft could be heard in the distance, approaching for another bombing run. The Valerians around them began to panic, looking for shelter from the coming attack, but the humans didn't run. They didn't even flinch. Instead, they began to unpack their equipment, and Elder Vexhai realized with growing horror that the help he had asked for might be more dangerous than the enemy they faced. The nightmare had just begun. When monsters fight monsters, the Scarix aircraft screamed overhead, their engines howling like wounded beasts as they prepared for another bombing run. Elder Vex-High threw himself to the ground, covering his head with his hands as he had learned to do in the past terrible hours. Around him, the surviving Valerians did the same, their bodies shaking with fear and exhaustion. But the humans remained standing. Commander Thorn pulled a small device from her belt and spoke into it calmly. "Santos, paint the targets." Private Santos aimed what looked like a simple laser pointer at the approaching aircraft. 3 red dots appeared on the leading bomber, invisible to everyone except the human equipment. "Targets acquired, Commander." "Good. Chun, you're up." Sergeant Maya Chin smiled as she pulled a tube from her backpack. It was barely as long as her arm and looked like nothing more than a piece of pipe with some wires attached. She shouldered it casually, aimed at the sky, and pulled a trigger. The missile that emerged was small and quiet, nothing like the massive weapons the Valerians had tried to use against the Scarix. It rose into the air with barely a whisper, following the laser designation that Santos had painted on the target. The explosion, when it came, was devastating. The lead Scarix bomber simply ceased to exist, torn apart by an explosion that turned it into falling debris. The 2 aircraft behind it were caught in a blast, their pilots fighting desperately to maintain control as shrapnel tore through their engines. 2 more coming around from the east. Morrison reported his sniper rifle already tracking new targets. "Permission to engage?" "Negative," Thorn replied. "Save your ammunition." "Chin, do you have another present for our guests?" "Always," Chin replied, loading another missile into her launcher. The second wave of Scarix aircraft lasted exactly 14 seconds. Elder Vex-High lifted his head from the rubble, staring in amazement at the clear sky above. For Scarix bombers had been destroyed in less than a minute by 5 humans with weapons that looked like toys compared to the massive defensive systems his people had built. "How?" he whispered at Doctor. Reacher knelt beside him, checking the Elder for injuries with gentle but efficient hands. "We've had a lot of practice," he said simply. "Earth isn't a nice place. Everything there tries to kill you, including other humans. We learned to fight back." In the distance, the ground began to shake with the rumble of approaching vehicles. The Scarix had noticed the destruction of their air support, and they were sending ground forces to investigate. The sound grew louder as armored vehicles and troop transports moved through the ruined streets, heading directly for the human landing zone. "How many?" Thorn asked, studying her tactical display. 30 vehicles, approximately 300 infantry, Santos reported, monitoring enemy communications. "They're angry about losing those aircraft." "Good," Thorn replied. "Angry enemies make mistakes." She turned to address Elder Vex-High, who was struggling to his feet. "We need to know the layout of this city. Sewers, maintenance tunnels, anything we can use to move without being seen." "Why would you want to hide?" Vex-High asked. "Your weapons are clearly superior." Thorn's expression was patient, but cold. "Because we're outnumbered 60 to 1, and our ammunition isn't unlimited. We don't win by being stronger. We win by being smarter." The Elder led them to a maintenance access that connected to the underground systems beneath the city. As they moved through the tunnels, Vex-High tried to understand what he was seeing. The humans moved like water, flowing around obstacles and through shadows with impossible grace. Their weapons were always ready, their eyes constantly scanning for threats, their communication reduced to hand signals and whispered words. They were not soldiers in the way the Valerians understood the term. They were something else entirely. They were predators. Above ground, General Cross received the report of his destroyed aircraft with growing irritation. The Valerians had been beaten, their military scattered, their cities burning. The appearance of unknown forces was an unwelcome complication, but hardly a serious threat. "Who are they?" he demanded, studying the tactical display on his command ship. "Unknown species, General," his intelligence officer replied. "Small, bipedal, minimal technological signature." The destroyed aircraft appeared to have been hit by primitive kinetic weapons. "Primitive?" Cross's eyes glowed with predatory interest. How many? Estimated 5 to 10 individuals. Cross laughed, a sound like breaking glass. 5 individuals destroyed 4 of my bombers? Impossible. There must be more of them hidden somewhere. But his scouts found no evidence of a larger force. The thermal scans showed exactly 5 heat signatures moving through the underground tunnels, carrying simple projectile weapons and basic equipment. By all appearances, they were nothing more than a minor annoyance that could be crushed with minimal effort. Send a full company, cross-ordered. Bring me their heads. 200 Skarx warriors entered the tunnel system, their massive forms barely fitting through passages designed for the smaller Valerians. They carried energy weapons that could melt through steel, wore armor that had stopped everything the galaxy could throw at them, and moved with the confidence of a species that had never known defeat. They were about to learn something new. Commander Thorn had positioned her team at a junction where 4 tunnels met, creating what military strategists called a kill zone. Chen had spent 20 minutes placing small explosive charges at critical structural points, while Morrison found a sniper position that gave him clear lines of sight down 3 different approaches. Santos monitored enemy communications, tracking the Skarx movement through the tunnels, while Dr. Reacher prepared medical supplies and watched their rear. 200 targets incoming, Santos whispered. They're moving in standard formation, no advanced scouts. Overconfident, Thorn observed. They think they're hunting rats in a maze. They don't realize the rats are hunting them. The first Skarx warrior rounded the corner at 1,437 hours, local time. Morrison's rifle spoke once, and the warrior's head exploded in a spray of blue blood and bone fragments. The sound echoed through the tunnels like thunder, followed immediately by the roar of Skarx voices as they realized they were under attack. What followed was not a battle in any traditional sense. It was a slaughter. The Skarx had trained for centuries to fight in open ground, where their size and strength could be brought to bear against their enemies. But in the narrow tunnels, those advantages became liabilities. They could only move single file, and their energy weapons were useless against enemies they couldn't see. Chen's explosives brought down sections of tunnel, trapping groups of warriors in dead ends where Morrison could pick them off at his leisure. Thorn and Santos moved through side passages like ghosts, appearing behind enemy formations to spray them with automatic weapons fire before vanishing again into the darkness. The Skarx tried to retreat, but found their escape routes blocked by more explosives. They tried to call for support, but Santos was jamming their communications. They tried to use their superior firepower, but their energy weapons simply melted holes in empty walls while the humans struck from shadows and blind spots. In 47 minutes, 200 Skarx warriors were reduced to scattered corpses and moaning wounded. The 5 humans had used exactly 63 rounds of ammunition and 4 explosive charges. Elder Vexhai, who had watched the entire engagement from a safe distance, felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had asked for help, but what had answered his call was something that terrified him almost as much as the Skarx themselves. "This is how you fight?" he asked when the shooting stopped. "This is how we survive," Thorn corrected, reloading her weapon with practiced efficiency. "On Earth, everything is trying to kill you. The weather, the animals, the plants, the geography, and especially other humans. We learned to use our brains because we couldn't rely on our strength. But the killing," Vexhai whispered. "So much death, and you show no emotion at all." Dr. Reacher looked up from treating a wounded Skarx prisoner. "We feel it," he said quietly. "We just don't let it stop us from doing what needs to be done." Above ground, General Cross stared at his tactical display in disbelief. An entire company of his best warriors had simply vanished into the tunnel system. Their life signs had gone dark one by one, and now there was only silence from below. "Impossible," he growled. "Send another company. And this time, bring plasma charges. Burn them out." But his second-in-command, a scarred veteran named Captain Vex, stepped forward with an expression of concern. "General, perhaps we should consider the possibility that these unknowns are more dangerous than they appear." "Dangerous?" Cross's claws extended involuntarily. "They're primitives with projectile weapons. Primitives who just killed 200 of our warriors without taking a single casualty, Vex pointed out. Perhaps we should learn more about them before committing more forces. Cross was about to dismiss the suggestion when his communications officer spoke up. General, we're receiving a transmission. It's from the unknowns. Put it through. Commander Thorne's face appeared on the main screen, her expression calm and professional. Behind her, Elder Vex High could be seen tending to wounded Valerians while Dr. Reacher worked on injured Skarx prisoners. General Cross, Thorne said, somehow knowing exactly who she was addressing. I'm Commander Zara Thorne, Terran Defense Corps. I believe you have something that doesn't belong to you. Cross leaned forward, studying the small human with predatory interest. And what might that be, Primitive? This planet, these people, their freedom. Thorne's voice never changed tone, but something in her eyes made Cross step back involuntarily. You're going to return what you've stolen and leave the system. Now. Or what? Cross demanded. You'll kill another few hundred of my warriors? I have 50,000 troops on this planet. Yes, Thorne replied simply. We'll kill them all if we have to. That's what we do. That's what we've always done. Earth made us very good at killing things that are bigger and stronger than we are. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Skarx command ship in silence. For the first time in his military career, General Cross felt something he had never experienced before, fear. Not of death, which was always a possibility in war, but of something else entirely. Fear of an enemy that seemed to welcome violence, that treated the killing of superior forces as a routine task, that showed no hesitation or mercy. General, Captain Vex said quietly, "What are your orders?" Cross stared at the blank screen for a long moment, his mind racing through tactical possibilities. Every scenario he could imagine ended the same way, with more of his warriors dead and the humans still fighting. Double the perimeter guards, he finally ordered, and send a message to High Command. Tell them we may need reinforcements. In the tunnels below, Commander Thorne turned to Elder Vex High, who was staring at her with a mixture of gratitude and terror. You told them you would kill 50,000 warriors, the Elder said. Can you actually do such a thing? Thorne checked her weapon and began walking toward the next objective. Elder, where we come from, 50,000 isn't a war. It's just a Tuesday. As her words echoed through the tunnels, Vex High realized that his people had summoned something from the darkness between stars, something that might save them or might doom them all. The monsters had come to fight monsters, and the galaxy would never be the same. When saviors become legends, the night fell over Valeria Prime like a shroud, but sleep did not come to either side of the conflict. In the Skarx encampments, warriors checked their weapons with unusual care and spoke in hushed voices about the small demons that had emerged from the tunnels. In the ruins of the Valerian capital, survivors huddled in shelters while 5 humans planned the impossible. Commander Thorne stood over a holographic display that Santos had assembled from salvaged Valerian technology and human components. The three-dimensional map showed the entire continental landmass, with red markers indicating Skarx positions and blue dots representing known Valerian survivor groups. The main command ship is here, she said, pointing to a massive red marker hovering over the central mountain range. Cross is keeping it in high orbit, probably thinking he's safe up there. 17 kilometers up, Chin observed, studying the tactical data. That's a long way to throw a rock. But not impossible, Morrison added. If we can get to the right position. Dr. Reacher looked up from his medical supplies, concern evident in his voice. Even if we can reach their command ship, there are still 47,000 Skarx troops on the ground. We can't fight them all. We don't need to fight them all, Thorne replied. We just need to cut off the head. Skarx society is based on strict hierarchy. Remove the leadership and the rest will fall apart. Elder Vex High, who had been listening to the conversation with growing amazement, stepped forward. You're planning to attack their flagship? 5 people against a ship that size? 5 people have done worse things, Thorne said matter-of-factly. Santos, what's the status on their orbital defenses? Standard Scarix configuration, the communications specialist reported. Energy barriers, point defense systems, fighter squadrons. But they're designed to stop large attack fleets, not small infiltration teams. And they won't be expecting us to come from below, Chin added with a grin that made Vexhi's skin crawl. I love it when enemies think in 2 dimensions. Thorn nodded and began outlining the plan. It was insane, suicidal, and completely impossible by any rational standard. It involved launching themselves into orbit, using modified Valerian mining equipment, infiltrating a ship the size of a small city, fighting through thousands of enemy soldiers, and somehow getting back to the surface alive. The fact that the humans discussed it as if it were a routine training exercise was perhaps the most terrifying thing Vexhi had ever witnessed. We'll need a distraction, Thorn concluded, something to keep their attention focused planetside while we make the approach. I can provide that, Vexhi said suddenly. The Valerian resistance still has some weapons caches hidden throughout the city. If we coordinate simultaneous attacks on their ground positions, no. Thorn's voice was sharp. Your people aren't soldiers. They'll be slaughtered. Then what do you suggest? Thorn's smile was cold as winter. We let them come to us. 6 hours later, as the first light of dawn began to touch the eastern horizon, General Cross received a transmission that made his blood boil with rage. The 5 humans had taken position in the ruins of the Valerian Cultural Center, a massive complex at the heart of the city that held symbolic importance for the conquered species. General, Commander Thorn's voice was maddeningly calm as it came through the ship speakers. We have something of yours. The image that accompanied the transmission showed Captain Vex, Cross's second-in-command, bound and unconscious in what appeared to be the center's main auditorium. Around him, dozens of other captured Scarix officers sat in chairs like an audience waiting for a performance. How did you capture my officers? Cross demanded. We asked nicely, Thorn replied. They were conducting a reconnaissance in force through the museum district. We convinced them to surrender. The lie was smooth and practiced, but Cross knew the truth. Somehow, impossibly, 5 humans had ambushed and captured 43 of his best warriors without anyone else noticing. What do you want? He growled. Nothing complicated. Withdraw your forces from this system. Leave the Valerians in peace. Take your people and go find someone else to bully. And if I refuse? Thorn's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes made Cross step back from the screen. Then we start sending your officers back to you. Piece by piece, the transmission ended, leaving Cross staring at a blank screen. Around him, his bridge crew waited for orders, their reptilian faces showing uncertainty for the first time in years. General, his tactical officer said, quietly, if we assault the cultural center, the captives will likely be killed. And if we don't, his weapons officer added, we look weak in front of the troops. Cross's claws scraped against the metal of his command chair as he considered his options. The humans had placed him in an impossible position. If he attacked, he would be responsible for the deaths of his own officers. If he didn't, his authority would be undermined. Prepare a full assault, he finally ordered. 3 battalions, heavy weapons support. I want that building turned to glass. Sir, what about the prisoners? The prisoners knew the risks when they accepted their commissions. The Scarix Empire does not negotiate with terrorists. But as his forces began moving toward the cultural center, Cross felt something he had never experienced before. Doubt. Not about his decision, but about his chances of success. The humans had proven to be far more dangerous than their appearance suggested, and he was beginning to suspect that walking into their chosen battlefield might be exactly what they wanted him to do. Inside the cultural center, Commander Thorn watched the approaching Scarix forces through Morrison's scope. 3,000 warriors, supported by armored vehicles and artillery pieces, were advancing through the ruined streets in perfect formation. Looks like Cross decided his officers were expendable, she observed. Can't say I'm surprised, Morrison replied, tracking targets with mechanical precision. From what I've read about Scarix culture, individual lives don't mean much to them. Different from us, Dr. Reacher said as he finished setting up his mobile medical station. We don't leave people behind. No, Thorn agreed. We don't. The Scarx prisoners, who had been listening to this exchange, began to show signs of confusion. They had expected threats, torture, interrogation. Instead, the human medic was treating their wounds, the demolitions expert was offering them water, and their captors spoke about the value of individual lives as if it were an alien concept. Captain Vex, who had regained consciousness during the night, studied the humans with growing bewilderment. "Why are you treating us well?" he asked. "We are your enemies." Dr. Reacher looked up from checking the captain's injuries. "Because you're people. Even if you're people we have to fight." "I don't understand. On the battlefield, you showed no mercy. You killed without hesitation." "Because that's what war is," Thorn explained, checking her weapon one final time. Had been captured by a single enemy soldier. His ground forces were in full retreat. His carefully planned invasion had become a nightmare of tactical impossibilities. "How?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Commander Thorn appeared on screen one final time, standing beside the android on his own bridge. "Because, General, you made the same mistake everyone makes when they meet humans for the first time. You thought we were just another species, but we're not. We're the children of a world that spent 4 billion years trying to kill us. We learned to be clever, or we learned to be dead." 15 seconds, the android announced. General Cross looked around his command ship, seeing his officers unconscious but alive, his systems compromised but not destroyed. The humans could have simply blown his ship apart from a distance. Instead, they had risked everything to capture it intact, preserving the lives of his crew, even while defeating his forces. "All units," he said into his communicator, his voice heavy with defeat, "withdraw to the fleet. We are leaving this system." Immediately, Thorn added helpfully. Immediately, Cross confirmed 12 hours later, the last Scarx transport lifted off from Valeria Prime. The invasion was over, the Empire's forces scattered to the winds, and a peaceful species had been saved from conquest. Elder Vexhai stood in the ruins of his capital city, watching the alien ships disappear into the darkness between stars. Around him, his people emerged from shelters and hiding places, their voices rising in celebration and relief. But the elder felt no joy, only a deep and abiding sense of change. The 5 humans stood nearby, preparing to return to their own ship. They had refused all offers of reward, declined invitations to state ceremonies, and politely turned down requests for extended stays. They were leaving as quietly as they had arrived, without fanfare or celebration. "Why?" Vexhai asked Commander Thorn. "Why help us? What do you gain from our survival?" Thorn paused in her equipment check, considering the question. "Nothing," she admitted. "We don't gain anything. But you asked for help, and we were in a position to provide it. That's enough. But you risked everything. Your lives, your ship, your mission. For strangers." "For people," Thorn corrected. "That's what we do. It's what we've always done. Humans look out for each other, and we've decided that each other includes anyone who needs help." As the human ship lifted off from the ruined capital, Elder Vexhai activated the planetary communication system. His message was broadcast not just to his own people, but to every listening post in the galaxy, carried by quantum relays to the farthest reaches of known space. To all species, to all worlds, to anyone who might hear this message, he began, "Let it be known that there exists in the galaxy a people called humans. They are small in stature, few in number, and equipped with technology that seems primitive by our standards. But they possess something far more valuable than weapons or ships or vast armies." He paused, looking up at the stars where the human vessel was already disappearing from sight. "They possess the will to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. They ask for nothing in return except the knowledge that they have done what is right. And they will cross the galaxy itself to help those who call for aid. If you are peaceful and in need of protection, know that they will answer your call. If you are aggressive and prey upon the weak, know that they will find you. And if you threaten those under their protection, know that you face not just soldiers or warriors, but something far more dangerous. You face humans, and humans, as we have learned, are very good at impossible things. The message spread across the galaxy at the speed of light, carried by traders and diplomats, military commanders, and civilian governments. It spoke of a species that fought not for conquest or glory, but for the simple principle that those who could protect others had a duty to do so, and in the dark spaces between stars, where predators lurked and empires planned their next conquests, a new fear began to grow. Not fear of human weapons or human ships, but fear of human resolve. Because the galaxy had learned something important. When the innocent called for help, humanity answered, and when humanity answered, impossible things became inevitable. Weapon to the defense. And through it all, Commander Thorn fought with the cold efficiency of a machine built for war, her weapon never silent, her commands never hesitating. The Skarx prisoners watched in amazement as their captors fought to protect them. Captain Vex found himself calling out warnings when Skarx soldiers moved to flank the humans, and several of his officers began providing covering fire with captured weapons. Why? One of them asked Dr. Reacher as the medic treated a plasma burn on the officer's arm. Why fight so hard to protect your enemies? Because that's what makes us human. Reacher replied, simply T-1,347 hours, as the ammunition counters on their weapons reached critical levels and the Skarx began their final push into the auditorium. A new sound filled the air. It was the scream of an object moving at hypersonic velocity through atmosphere, followed by an explosion that shook the entire building. The modified escape pod had crashed through the cultural center's roof like a meteor, its ablative armor protecting it from both gravity and enemy fire. As it came to rest in the center of the auditorium, hatches opened to reveal not reinforcements, but something far more valuable: equipment, weapons, ammunition, and a single occupant, a combat android designated Echo 7, programmed with the tactical knowledge of humanity's greatest warriors and equipped with weapons that had never been tested outside of laboratory conditions. Package delivered. Captain Crane's voice crackled through the communication system. Hope you can use it. Commander Thorn smiled as she grabbed a fresh weapon from the pod's armory. Copy that, Retribution. Thanks for the care package. What happened next would be remembered in Skarx military academies for generations as the moment their empire learned to fear a species they had never heard of. The humans, reinforced and resupplied, did not simply hold their position. They attacked. Echo 7 moved through the Skarx ranks like death incarnate, its weapons systems optimized for maximum psychological impact. The android's human-designed tactical protocols included elements that no purely rational species would have conceived: intimidation, demoralization, and the deliberate cultivation of terror. The 5 original humans followed in the android's wake, their movements coordinated with inhuman precision. They had trained together for years, fought together across a dozen star systems, and saved each other's lives more times than they could count. They were not just a team, they were a pack, and they were hunting. The tide of battle turned in minutes. The Skarx, who had been advancing with confidence born of overwhelming numbers, suddenly found themselves retreating in panic. Their weapons, designed to fight conventional enemies, seemed useless against opponents who moved like ghosts and struck like lightning. General Cross watched the disaster unfold from his command ship, his tactical displays showing the impossible. 3,000 warriors, supported by armor and artillery, were being routed by 6 beings in an auditorium. General, his communications officer, reported, "We're receiving another transmission from the humans." Thorn's face appeared on screen once again, but this time she was no longer in the cultural center. The background showed the bridge of a Skarx cruiser, its crew dead or unconscious around her. "Hello again, General," she said pleasantly. "We've borrowed one of your ships. Hope you don't mind." "Impossible," Cross whispered. "You were surrounded. My warriors had you trapped." "Your warriors had us exactly where we wanted to be," Thorn corrected. "That was never a last stand. It was a distraction." The realization hit Cross like a physical blow. While he had been focused on the battle at the cultural center, while his entire attention had been drawn to the 5 humans fighting desperately in the auditorium, something else had been happening. The care package from orbit hadn't just contained weapons and supplies. It had contained the infiltration team. "You see, General," Thorn continued, her voice maddeningly calm. Humans learned long ago that the best way to win a war isn't to fight the biggest battles. It's to fight the right battles. And right now, the right battle is happening on your flagship. The transmission cut to a new view, the command bridge of Cross's own ship, where Echo 7 stood surrounded by unconscious Skarx officers. The android had somehow boarded the massive vessel, disabled its crew, and taken control of its systems without anyone noticing. You have 30 seconds to order the withdrawal of all Skarx forces from this system, the android announced in a voice that was perfectly human except for its complete lack of emotion. Failure to comply will result in the immediate destruction of this vessel and all aboard. Cross stared at the screen in disbelief. His flagship, the most powerful ship in the Skarx fleet, but you're not fighting anymore. Now, you're just wounded prisoners who need medical attention. Vex stared at her in amazement. You're going to fight 3,000 of my warriors to protect 43 prisoners you captured yesterday? We're going to fight 3,000 of your warriors because that's the job, Thorn corrected. Protecting you is just part of it. The first explosions came at 0847 hours as Skarx artillery began pounding the cultural center. The ancient building shook under the barrage, its elegant architecture crumbling under the weight of modern weapons. But the humans had chosen their position well. The center's lower levels were built into solid bedrock, and the maze of galleries and exhibition halls created perfect defensive positions. Chen had spent the night turning the building into a fortress, placing explosives at strategic choke points, and creating kill zones that would funnel attackers into carefully prepared ambushes. Morrison had found a position in the main tower that gave him overlapping fields of fire across the entire complex. Santos had tapped into the building's public address system, allowing him to coordinate the defense while monitoring enemy communications as the artillery barrage lifted and the first wave of Skarx infantry entered the building. The humans went to work. Morrison's rifle spoke in measured cadences, each shot dropping an enemy warrior with mechanical precision. Chen's explosives channeled the attackers into corridors where Thorn could engage them with automatic weapons fire. Santos called out enemy positions and movements, turning the defense into a deadly dance of coordination and timing. But this time was different from the tunnel fighting. The Skarx had learned from their previous defeats. They moved more carefully, used better tactics, and brought overwhelming firepower to bear on each position. The humans were forced to fall back repeatedly, trading space for time as they conducted a fighting withdrawal through the building to BY noon. They had been pushed back to the main auditorium where the prisoners were being held. The Skarx could have simply blown the building apart with orbital bombardment, but the presence of their own officers forced them to assault room by room, step by bloody step. Ammunition status. Thorn asked during a brief lull in the fighting. 60%, Morrison reported. 45%, Chen added. Same, Santos confirmed at Dr. Reacher was busy treating a wounded Skarx prisoner who had been hit by shrapnel from his own side's weapons. We can't keep this up indefinitely, he said, without looking up from his patient. We don't need to, Thorn replied, checking her tactical display. Just a few more hours. Captain Vex, who had been watching the humans fight with growing respect, finally spoke up. Few more hours for what? Thorn's smile was sharp as a blade. For our ride to arrive. High above the planet, the TSS Retribution had been conducting what the ship's log recorded as routine maintenance operations in the outer system. But maintenance operations did not typically require the ship to achieve precise orbital positioning, nor did they usually involve loading the cargo bay with specialized equipment. Captain Crane watched her chronometer with professional calm. 15 minutes to launch window. She announced that in the cargo bay, a single escape pod had been modified far beyond its original specifications. Where once it had carried basic life support and emergency supplies, it now held ablative armor, stealth systems, and enough firepower to level a city block. The plan was insane, but then again, so were the people who had conceived it. Back in the cultural center, the final assault was beginning. General Cross had committed his entire reserve to the attack, and 3,000 Skarx warriors were advancing through the building in overwhelming numbers. The humans had fought brilliantly, but mathematics was finally catching up with them. Contact front. Morrison called out as enemy soldiers poured into the auditorium. The firefight that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. 5 humans, surrounded by overwhelming numbers, fought with the fury of people who had nothing left to lose. They moved like dancers in a ballet of violence, each supporting the others in an intricate pattern of fire and movement that had been perfected through years of combat. Chen's explosives brought down sections of the ceiling, creating barriers and choke points. Morrison's rifle sang its deadly song, each note ending in enemy life. Santos coordinated their movements, while simultaneously calling in phantom artillery strikes that existed only in the Scarix communications network, causing confusion and panic among the attackers. The Doctor. Reacher moved through the chaos like a guardian angel, treating wounded on both sides while occasionally adding his own.